Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Tate, Chakrabarti, as it says here. I'm Senior Privacy Counsel with Reckitt Benckiser. As John mentioned, I spoke recently at the Manchester event, so thanks for having me back. By way of introduction, my role with RB, it involves the whole gamut of privacy matters for the company's global operations. And just a bit about RB, some of our well-known brands are here. I'll let all of you have a look at the slide just before we start for a few seconds. Okay. I've picked 7 topics to go through. I feel that all of these are going to be relevant in some way or another to most of your organisations and also to governments and other organisations all around the world. So if we start with the first one, the rise of the regulations. When the GDPR first came into force in 2018, it sounds cliched, but it really was the beginning of a new era in data privacy. The new law did lead the way, and it showed the whole world what a modern framework should be like in terms of privacy. And the best thing of all to me is that it's future-proof. In 2020, more and more countries all around the world are going to be adapting DP laws. Most of these are inspired either directly or indirectly by the GDPR. All of them, however, are concerned with the processing, storage, transfer, usage, and disclosure of personal data. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about. And for those of you to whom it's not clear, personal data is data by which you can clearly identify an individual. That's what the FOSS is all about. So who's going to be joining the party in 2020? I've picked 3 jurisdictions. Let's start with California. The California Consumer Privacy Act came into force on the 1st of January this year. It's inspired in part by the GDPR. It is a bit different as well. I know that a handful of other states in America are following suit. I think Maine and Nevada have passed smaller bills, and in the year ahead, Wisconsin, the state of New York, Washington, Texas, they are all looking to implement much larger DP bills for their own states. Why is it significant to all of you? Most of you here work in the tech industry. California is the home of Silicon Valley. At some point, this jurisdiction and the new laws which are coming into force, they will touch you and the consumers that you work for. Moving on, India. India is about to unleash its own privacy bill extremely shortly. Its goal is to set a framework for the processing of personal data for its own citizens. Again, there's a lot of you here who work for tech companies. This is relevant to you because most tech companies have subsidiaries or operations based in the subcontinent. Once more, if you are processing data of their citizens, be mindful of the new laws which are coming into force. And finally, Brazil. This is the largest internet market in Latin America. From memory, there's about 140 million users there. Brazilian law currently is quite fragmented. There's about 40 or so smaller DP laws which operate sometimes quite independently of each other, but that's about to change. On the 15th of August this year, there's a new bill which is coming in. It's abbreviated to the LPGD, and it borrows quite heavily from the GDPR. Again, that's one to look out for. The second topic is data retention. Data retention is essentially a cornerstone of the GDPR. It's critical to it, and all the other privacy laws which are going to come into force in the years ahead, it's going to be just as important for all of them. You're probably asking the question, why has he picked this out? Because there's about 50 other things I could have spoken about. I'm going to answer that with another question. What would non-compliance with this mean to your organisation? I'm going to talk about a little case which occurred quite recently. On the 30th of October 2019, the Berlin Data Commissioner, they fined a German company called Deutsche Wohnen SE 14.5 million euros. This is because they were in breach of data retention laws. They are a real estate company, and they have a data archiving system that's been non-compliant for quite a few years, in the sense that they have the ability to input data, but there's no way to erase it in future. The German authorities had mentioned this to them quite a few times, but as I say, in late October of last year, they came down quite heavily upon them. Once the authorities looked at what was inside the data archiving system, they found evidence of things like pay slips, health records, tax returns, employment contracts. At some point or another, most of these were used to verify the identity of an individual. After that was completed, all that should have been deleted. The German authority took quite a dim view as to this, and they declared that this was a clear breach of Article 25.1 of the GDPR and also the general processing principle of Article 5. As I say, they were fined 14.5 million euros, which was 2% of their annual turnover. Extremely quickly, I'm mentioning this because, in my experience, there's a lot of companies now all over the world who have a privacy program that's reached a decent level of maturity. But data retention is often something that's overlooked. It's a small thing, but please ensure moving forwards you are compliant with it for the GDPR and for any other jurisdictions that you may operate in. If not, you could find yourself to be an easy target for a regulator. The next topic, which ties in quite nicely with what I've been talking about, fines. By way of background, there's two tiers of fines under the GDPR. There's the lower level, which is for lesser offences, or so as they are deemed. And they are usually sandwiched in between 10 million euros or 2% of a company's global turnover. For upper level offences, the fines are usually sandwiched in between 20 million euros or 4% of a global turnover of the company. The example I've just used with Deutsche Wohnen SE, that was a lower level offence. Using my company as an example, our annual turnover is something in the region of £13.7 billion. If we were fined 4% of that, it would be something like £670 million. That's quite eye-watering, so just be wary that these rules apply to all of you out there. Please be mindful. With regards when the GDPR came into force initially, there was almost an unofficial grace period that the ICO and other data regulatory bodies afforded most organisations all over the continent. This lasted, as I say, it was unofficial for about a year to 18 months, but that time period has now passed. Moving forward, I am of the firm opinion that in the year ahead and beyond, we will see higher and higher levels of fines. The current record is still held by CNIL, who are the French regulator. They levied that against Google last year, and I think it's £55.4 million. I'm pretty sure that in the weeks or even months ahead, that figure is going to be smashed. Specifically for your company, if you are fined by a data regulatory body, consider the reputational damage that you would be facing. That can often take years to restore. It's lost so easily. There's also compensation claims from third parties. Under new privacy laws, individuals who can demonstrate they have suffered a loss due to a data breach caused by yourself or any of your sub-processors, they can sue you. This is something that's going to grow hugely in the years ahead. Be mindful of that. And also, if you work for a listed company, it will almost inevitably mean a loss in share price, and that's not really something anybody wants. I'm going to talk very briefly about Brexit. The last time I spoke publicly about it, it was a few days before the 31st of January. It was literally on everyone's lips at the time. I think at the moment people are more concerned about the coronavirus, but I'm just going to give you a few headlines in connection with Brexit. As I say, we exited the EU on the 31st of January. We now have until the 31st of December for the government to agree withdrawal terms. That's known as the transition period. In that time, as Richard has spoken about quite just a few moments ago, there are many other issues to be discussed rather than privacy. Privacy is one issue, but it's an important one. When we left the EU on the 31st of January, in a nutshell, we are now seen in the eyes of of the European Commission as what's called a third country. In simple terms, the UK no longer operates in the European Economic Area. What this means with regards to privacy is that we now have to demonstrate that our laws are as good as, if not better, than the laws that people operate under in the continent, i.e. the GDPR. This is what's known as adequacy. The last country to achieve this was Japan, and that was last summer. Just to give you a bit of background, that took almost 2 years to achieve, and as things stand now, it's early March. We have about 9 months to get this sorted out. I'm personally not very optimistic we will, but watch this space. It's something that must be dealt with in the very near future. Cyber insurance. Quite a few people have spoken about this today. Emma, I don't think she's here, and yourself, Richard, you mentioned it earlier. I personally believe that this is, in today's world, just a no-brainer for any commercial organisation. Everyone should hold and look to hold a cyber policy. I often say to colleagues at work, people from functions such as finance, HR and others, that in essence all companies, all governments are at war. Everyone is under siege all the time. Knowing that, having a cyber policy could well save your bacon at some point down the line. With regards to cyber as an industry at the moment, most of the policies that exist at the moment, they almost came into being in late 2017. This was in the build-up to the GDPR. The market still is in quite a state of infancy, and what we find is that there's quite a few variations as to what's provided from different insurance companies. If you're looking to take out a policy in the very near future, please read the fine print. It's critical that you understand as a company what you need to do in order to trigger your policy. If you're looking to take one out, make sure you're happy with the wording of the policy, i.e. if you do need to trigger it in future, make sure you know how to do that as simply as possible. This is a topic I talk about often with other in-house counsel in other organisations and our counterparts in private practice. If you are looking to take out a policy, what I would recommend is make sure that you have a decent provision for ransomware. John, you mentioned this morning that of a company that went under because they had to pay due to a ransomware demand. That was heartbreaking. That's the first time I've heard of that, but it truly was heartbreaking. Other than that, in terms of general scope of the coverage, make sure that it's as broad as possible. The more narrow your scope of coverage, in simple terms, the harder the rod you're making for your own back if you do need to claim in future. Always keep property in the scope of cover, and the reason for this is that even in today's world, property is often the largest and most valuable asset that all companies own. And finally, this is a personal favourite of mine. We'll flick forward. Make sure that at all times you keep control of litigation. Don't hand over that control to an insurer or to a third company, or to a third party that they may nominate. The simple reason for that is that I believe every company should always be in control of its own destiny. There's 3 topics here that I don't really have time to go into much depth on, but I do believe that in the year ahead and beyond, they will be huge. There's going to be a lot written about them in the media. They will affect most of your organisations, and they will touch and impact upon privacy law quite heavily. They are ad tech, biometrics, and 5G. Other speakers have hinted at these, but keep an eye out for them. The final topic I want to talk about is not really something that sits under the umbrella of privacy law. It's data localization. Privacy law, as I've mentioned, we are talking primarily about personal data. But with data localization practices, what we're finding is that there are some countries who are looking to restrict any and all information about their citizens and keep it within their own territory. When I say some countries, I mean primarily China, Russia, and Vietnam. If any of you have operations out there, if you have subsidiaries that operate out there, please be aware of the local laws that are in place in connection with data localization. The main reason for mentioning this is that we've spoken about fines and penalties for GDPR. All of these are in terms of money. The fines and penalties for data localization are criminal sanctions. So your company directors could well face jail time or worse. Please be aware of this and seek legal advice on it if you want to know more. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.